Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. We'll get started right at 11. Good morning, Stacy. Good morning, Amal. I hope I'm saying your name right. All right, let's see if I can share my screen the right way. Oh, there we go. I figured out how to share it and look at you all. Yay. I'm doing halfway decent this morning. All right, it's 11 o'clock, and I want to go ahead and get started in case people have questions or want to chat. I am Dr. LaTonya McIver Penny, and this is Beyond Inclusion, and I hope that this is a session that blesses you. I am very informal, but I want to try to go through as much of the presentation and then leave time for questions, and I'll try my best to answer any kind of questions you have. What I found is that in sessions like this, I'll start talking about something. It'll spark something that you may have going on in your congregation or your faith community, or even just in your community or your kid's school. And you'll have a question. Please put it in the chat. I don't care if it's personal, if it's about a particular situation. I'm here to help. So I want you to hear me clearly that this is my passion. This is what I love to do. So again, this is Beyond Inclusion, and I'm going to see if I can navigate through this at the same time. Y'all pray my strength. All right, so I want to talk to you all about why I do this. Like, what is my why? What is my reason for being dedicated to talking about inclusion, talking about what it means to be differently abled? I really think people, when you know their why and you understand their passion, you begin to see why they're so committed. And it's not just, oh, it sounded good for me to do my school work on or my doctoral work on. Oh, Stacy, you're special ed administrator. Oh my gosh, I love you. We need to be friends. And parent of 2 with different needs. Yay, you're my kind of lady. So I'm excited to have another mama in the group that does this kind of work. All right, so my first why, and I did not put these in any order, so if you know my husband, don't tell him he popped up first. My first why is my husband, Charles Penny. My husband has ADHD, and he has unmedicated ADHD. He was diagnosed very early on, but he was one of the few children that was allergic to every single medication they tried to put him on. So he has had to learn to navigate this world as a child through adulthood with ADHD. And when I say he has ADHD, there is a spectrum of ADHD. He's way over here, right? His focus can be so sporadic, but yet he can hyper focus on things too. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. That cute little picture of a pink towel and a blue towel are my twins, Hunter and Taylor. They were born at 25 weeks gestation. Taylor entered the world at 1 pound 6 ounces. Hunter entered the world at 1 pound 7 ounces. And the journey of prematurity has been a long journey. And they are now a lot older, but they are my why, and I use cute pictures. And so that's when Taylor was just diagnosed. She was diagnosed about 3 months before, in this picture of them in white and blue, with cerebral palsy or cerebral palsy, depends on how you prefer to say it. And they told me 3 months before this picture, she would never sit up on her own. And so I like to show this picture to show that, I know we're going to get into the conversation about medical cure, medical healing and cure versus healing. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And that is Hunter, who's waving in the picture as well. My other why is this lady in the corner, Miss Barb Newman. She was my mentor and advocate, and I saw her do this work on a national level. Miss Barb was a special ed instructor in Michigan who saw that her students weren't being served in their faith communities. So she started working with the churches and became a part of the Christian Learning Center. And now it's called All Belong, and I work for them as well. But Ms. Barb passed this past year and was my mentor and got me on the national circuit talking about special needs and being differently able. The next picture of my why, y'all, those two divas, and we usually have a sorority picture together, but I tried not to be biased today. But these two divas on this picture are my mom and my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law in blue has a rare eye condition that does not genetically usually run in the African American genes, but she, from ancestors and from her history, has a rare disease that decreases her ability to see. So it is projected that by the time she's in her 80s, she'll be completely blind. So my mother-in-law, Edith, is differently able, and she's still a diva, honey. And my mother, who's in the red and black, Phyllis, is also differently able. My mother can only hear out of one ear, and her hearing is very decreased in her, what she calls her good ear. And so these are some of the people that I say you may not even realize that they're differently able. And last but not least, that little cutie in the corner is my cousin Morgan. That is her prom night. That's when my face was a lot skinnier. Morgan made me drive 2 hours to come and help her get dressed for prom. And Morgan went to regular prom in high school with everyone else, and she made me drive her to the prom and did not tell me that. But Morgan is one of the reasons I do the work that I do. So my why is quite real and it's quite personal. But I want to talk to you a little bit about the fact, all right, so now I have to click back so I can see your comments. 28 weeker. Oh, see, you two are committed to this kind of work too. I always like to talk about biblical foundations first, so people don't think I'm just pulling this out of the sky. And I want to also show and talk about how my own beliefs have changed and have stretched in what I think of when I say the words inclusion or creating spaces of inclusion and the stuff that I teach. So biblically, I started my work with a text that many people are very familiar with, that Luke 5 text, that Jesus is sitting there and he's having this conversation and the power of the Lord. Okay, I'm Luke 5:17. And the power of the Lord came upon him to heal the sick. And you can see this, like I'm not reading it word for word, but picture this. There are people in the home or in this gathering, and it's packed because Jesus, the word is out, Jesus can heal, and he is doing some healing that night. And that particular time, some people, it says men, this version, but some people carrying a paralyzed person on a mat tried to take him into the house to lay him before Jesus. But y'all, they couldn't get in, right? We've all heard this text. I love preaching this text. They could not find a way because of the crowd. So they went up to the roof, they pulled back the layers, and they lowered his mat through the tiles into the middle of the crowd while Jesus is preaching. Can y'all imagine preaching and then a person is like coming down from the sky? Then Jesus saw their faith. I love the text because it doesn't say Jesus saw the man on the mat and went, what the world? Jesus saw their faith. And he said, friends, your sins are forgiven. And the Pharisees and the teachers of the law began thinking to themselves, who in the world do he think he is? He is speaking blasphemy. He can't forgive sins, just God. Jesus knew what they were thinking and asked, why are you thinking these things in your hearts? He said, is it easier for me to say your sins are forgiven or to say get up and walk? But I want you to know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. So he says to the man who's on the mat, I tell you, get up, take up your mat and go home. Immediately, he stood up in the front of them, took what he had been lying on, and went home praising God. And everyone was amazed and gave praise to God. They were filled with awe and said, "We have seen a remarkable thing today." Y'all, that's a good text. Y'all, this is where most churches find themselves in this text. They find themselves in this text because we are the barrier. So most people think when I say the church is in this text, they think about the two people who, or the four people who are carrying this mat, and they find themselves being a part of this change-making situation. No, we are the barriers. We are the people blocking people from getting to Jesus. We are the people that are snickering and talking. We are the Pharisees going, well, who thinks that that person should come to church? Or who gives that person the right to be there? We are the people that are the barriers for people of all abilities or different abilities to get to Jesus. That's where I see so many churches in this text. They are the barriers for themselves. They are the crowd. They are the Pharisees. They are the building that does not have access. They are everything that blocks people from getting to Jesus. But not only that, y'all, we've got some historical barriers. Y'all, I'm talking to my people today. Historically, we were taught to not talk about our own conditions. We were taught to, what happens in this house stays in this house. We were taught not to tell people about our conditions. I will never forget when my daughter was 3 years old and she was given her first set of orthotic braces, or what we call AFOs. And so they came and they were so cute. I still have them. I know that sounds crazy, but I still have her very first pair. They're about that tall and they covered from her foot to the back of her knee. And they had little butterflies on them. And we walked in the house, and my grandmother, who at the time was mid 80s, and she said, "What's wrong with that baby's feet?" And I said, "Well, Grandma, she has cerebral palsy, and these are to help strengthen her legs, and so that she can walk flat." So she was prone. She could not go flat on her heel. She was always a toe walker. My 80-plus-year-old grandmother looked at me and said, "Take those things off her feet. Don't make her wear those outside of the house. You don't want people to judge her. You don't want people to talk about her. You don't need people to know that. Don't do that to her." I was livid, but I'm respectful because I'm also a Southerner and I'm also have Black parents. So my mother looked at me like, "Okay, chill." I took a deep breath and I said, "Grandma, if I don't teach people about my daughter's challenges or about who she is and what she experiences, how will they ever know?" And I wanted to be upset, but I couldn't, because for me, I understood, and I hate to say her level of ignorance, but her level of shame. Let's talk about it, y'all. We were brought to this land because of our ability to do work. We're dealing with some historical stuff now. We were measured and valued as Black bodies by the amount of work we could produce. So when we wonder why our older adults don't talk about cancer or sickness or what they can't do or any of that, why they work themselves to the bone until they can't work anymore. Y'all, this is why we were always measured on our ability to produce. So when we were on slave plantations and we were working and we were having babies and we got pregnant and had a baby that may have had a disability or had a difference that caused that baby not to be able to produce as much, what we did was two things. We either hid the baby from the master if the baby could not produce. People literally hid their children and would say to the master, "I lost the baby." They would hide that child. That child stayed in slave quarters, never to be seen. Or number two, they taught the child how to overcompensate for what they thought was a lack of ability. So if they became extra hard workers, if they weren't a good person, if they weren't good at speaking, they would say, "Don't you speak, you just work hard." We taught them to overcompensate for what the world said they could not do. Why? Because if our bodies, our Black bodies couldn't produce then, we were gotten rid of. We were removed from the plantation. We were sent away. And there are stories about slave masters who killed babies who had disabilities or any kind of difference that they could not produce. Because for the slave master, if that baby could not produce and they did not see the value in that child being able to add to their plantation, what they saw was another mouth to provide for, and they would get rid of that baby or that child. So we, as Black and brown people, we who came from slavery, began to hide all of those things. We started telling them, don't you tell anybody that's wrong with that baby. Don't you tell the master that baby's even here. You better hide that baby. And so that mindset, that slave mentality began to pass down generation to generation. So my 80-some-year-old grandmother at the time, I had to think, this isn't what she really believes. This is what she's been taught. She's been taught that I should be ashamed of my daughter. She's been taught that I should be ashamed of my son. She hasn't been taught to accept them for the gift of God that they are. Y'all hear me, and I'm trying not to preach. I promise you, they let a Baptist preacher up here. So if it comes out, it comes out. I'm going to try to stick to the script. But we have been taught to hide what is wrong with us. We have been taught that we are broken. We have been taught, and that is a historical barrier that continues to exist in our community. And the reason I'm spending so much time here on this is because when I speak across the country, guess what I don't usually speak on? This. I don't usually have to do a whole conversation on shame and guilt, because the people I'm speaking to are the descendants of the master, right? And so their mindset is not of shame or guilt or hiding anything. Their mindset is still of ability and able to produce. So I do a different conversation. But for those of us who would have been in the quarters, those of us who would have been doing the work, those of us who were valued by our ability to produce, we have been convinced that if we are not able to produce or not produce at the same level as others, then we are disabled, right? So I try not to use that word. I usually use differently able, because let's be real, we're all differently able, honey. We're all differently able. Not to disregard anyone's physical or mental disability, but we all have varied levels of ability. And I promise you, you will see that range throughout your lifetime. So that's one of the historical barriers of the Black church. The historical barrier that is so large for us to get past. The historical barrier that frustrates me more than anything else is convincing Black churches and Black communities, my people, that we need to do the work of inclusion. Because we think if we don't name it that we're including Susie, or if we see Kiki and Kiki is a little special and we don't want to call her her diagnosis what it is, we don't want to say Kiki has autism. We want to say Kiki special, right? As long as we're doing stuff like that, we are doing a disservice to our children and their futures. So this is a major historical barrier that we've got to rip down. Think about that house that Jesus is preaching in. That's one of the barriers blocking our kids, our youth, our young adult, our people with special needs. That is one of the historical barriers that continues to block them. And that is our shame and our guilt. But I like to talk about the Jesus encounter, and I love this picture. Jesus is preaching. You see him, and he's Black Jesus, honey, because that's what he is. Jesus is preaching. He sees this man coming down on a mat. Jesus does not look at the man first or talk to the man first. Jesus speaks to the people who are still on the roof doing the work for the man. I want you to hear me clearly. Jesus's encounter focuses on what the people and who the people are that brought the man to him. And I bring that focus because it is our responsibility. to make room for those who may not be able to make room for themselves. It is our responsibility to create platforms for varied voices to be able to speak and to articulate their needs. It is our responsibility to take care of the least of these. And I'm not talking about the least of these being a person with a difference. The least of these is anyone who cannot get into the mix, any marginalized, pushed aside person, any person that has been deemed less than. It is our responsibility to bring them center to Jesus. This man has been literally brought down right in front of Jesus. And this encounter with Jesus is not about the man on the mat. This encounter is about the people who are watching, the people who are the barriers, the people who are blocking, the people who are judging, and the people who are making it happen. Hear me clearly. This encounter is about the people that are connected to the person on the mat. So this is what I love about the simplicity of this text. And this is what I did all of my doctoral work around, is a womanist theology of radical hospitality and inclusion. I'll speak a little bit to that in just a second. These people realized, these four, and I call them people because there is no identity given. So I believe one was a woman saying, hey, y'all, we're going to climb up here. We're going to rip this stuff off. We're going to drop this baby down here in front of Jesus. I believe a sister led that march because that's what we do. We make way and make room for all of God's children. The solution to the problem was to not look at the problem and say, oh, this is too hard. Sorry, God. No, you're on this mat. No, you want me to take you to Jesus. I get it. But there's a whole lot of people. We can't get you there. No. The solution was to move beyond the barrier. The men, the woman, whoever they are, they climb to the top. They lure this man to Jesus. That is what we have to do. Begin to look for solutions to the problems. I want you to hear me clearly that the actions of the four directly relates to the healing of one. It takes four people to get this one person to Jesus. What does that mean for us as believers? What does that mean for us as ministry leaders? It takes more than the person on the mat saying, I need to be included. It takes us looking around to see the barriers that are already existing in our communities. It takes us looking around and being willing to change our lenses so that we see barriers and remove the barriers, because it is directly the actions of the four that allow the healing of the one. So I always tell people, hashtag be one of four, be one of the four, one of those people that's determined to get people to Jesus. So I always try to talk a little bit about, oh yes, this decolonization, child, honey, we got to root it out. Woo, we got to do it. And I always tell the story of my grandmother, Lord rest her soul. She passed at 98 years old. And by then she was telling everybody about her grandbaby who has what they call CP. That's what she say. And she can do this and she can do that, but her body it still has CP. And it was this mind-blowing change that we saw in my grandmother, who was able to go from being ashamed of my daughter who had her AFO braces to being able to articulate and say, my great-grandbaby wasn't supposed to walk. My great-grandbaby wasn't supposed to sit up. My great-grandbaby has cerebral palsy, but God allows her, let me change that, and she has it, and God allowed her to be able to increase some of her levels and allowed her mom to be an advocate to say, what we can't increase in your ability, we can shift the environment around you so that it is inclusive for you. I love the fact that if I change my grandmother, who was stubborn as a mule, and her mindset and theology on shame and that internalization of being quiet about your own sicknesses, differences, or abilities, to being able to articulate, I have this and this is what I need. If we can do that with a 90-some-year-old person, we can do this with 30-year-olds and 20-year-olds. I do want to talk about healing versus cure. I have been asked to do Bible studies on this. We're not going into that much depth on this today, but I do want to talk about that. When people go, well, is your daughter cured of CP? No, she still has it. Is she healed from CP? Yep. See, healing is a spiritual act of transformation. Healing is a spiritual act of opening our minds to who we really are. Healing is allowing your spirit to heal, and it has nothing to do with your physical body. Hear me clearly. My healing has nothing to do with my physical being. Cure is a medical and cannot be equated. So I can pray all day long and I never get a physical cure, but my heart can be healed. My mind can be healed. I also have a cousin who has a long list of challenges. She is intellectually disabled, so she has ID. She's blind. She has very low ability to hear. And she also, if I'm not mistaken, has she has a rare blood condition. I can't think about it. I can't think of the name of it, and I apologize. However, my cousin Monica, I remember being at a family reunion. Yeah, I'm a storyteller. And I remember I was probably 10 years old and she was there. She's about 2 years older than me. And I remember at this family reunion, there was this guest preacher, and we ended on Sundays at service. And this guest preacher saw Monica come in and was sitting. Monica was sitting. Her family was a row ahead of us. And at the time, she did use a cane, but also used the assistance of her mom or her dad. And I remember him saying, there's one in here that can't see, and we're going to ask God to heal today. And I remember 10 years old, y'all, 10. I remember him bringing her down, and her mother, with grace and dignity, dealt with it. I don't know how she did it, but she led Monica down to the altar. And I don't know how long this man prayed over her, but I remember tapping my mother at 10 and going, does he know she was born this way? I said that. My mother reminds me on a very regular basis that I did not have a good filter, and I still don't. And I said, Mommy, does he know she was born this way and that she's okay? Like, me and Monica were just playing outside. Like, what is he doing? In church, I said this. My mother goes, just be quiet and don't say anything. Then he goes, if there's an unbeliever in the room, she won't get her healing. And if you don't believe that she's going to get her sight back, then it won't happen today. 10 years old, get this. I then shift my mindset to go, I believe. God, please don't let it be me that stops Monica from getting her sight back. God, I pray right now in the name of sweet baby Jesus. Like, I went into prayer because I heard this damaging theology coming from this pulpit of, I don't even know who this person was. And I believe, and I kept saying, I believe, God, please let her get her sight back. And after however many times he laid eyes and did what he was going to do to her, Monica came back, sat down, and she was still blind. She still couldn't hear, and she still had ID. And I was so angry. And I was angry because I said to my mom again, why would he do this to her? Because she can hear him. She may not have the best hearing, right? She may not be, crystal clear, but she hears him talking about her being broken. 10 years old, saying, Mom, we don't need to come back here. What we have to understand, especially when we're looking at the healing narratives of Jesus and all the healing stories, and I want to write about this one day when I have time, is how we preach those stories impacts people sitting in those pews or hearing your sermons virtually. It can either be a life-changing experience, or it can be the most damaging moment ever. And for me, it was life-changing. But I wasn't the one being exposed as broken or damaged. I was the one who was being challenged by my faith and praying, please, God, let me have enough faith that Monica gets her sight back today. And it was enough damage for me to remember some number of years later. that I don't want us to continue to perpetuate that damaging theology, that if you don't have enough faith, you're never going to be healed. Well, guess what? I may not be cured, but I can find healing. And I believe Monica had her healing before she ever walked through that door to experience that. Because had she not had healing in her heart and healing in her spirit, I don't know if she could have managed to stand through that and be degraded by that. I think it was something in her that thought, yeah, I know God. I sing with God. Because when her mom played that piano, Monica would start singing. And I think in my heart, and I believe that Monica, if she could speak with us today, would still be able to sing some of those songs. But we have to stop equating healing and cure in the same sentence. Stacy says, I equate healing with the understanding that we are all created exactly as he designed us to be for his purpose. So a cure is irrelevant. Go ahead, Miss Stacy. Can I quote you on that? Yes, I'm gonna write that down and quote you. And that's how we have to deal with it, right? Healing versus cure. And when we are thinking about cure or having a medical cure, I want us to also think about the fact that my daughter's CP may never physically go away. However, there are accommodations that we can put in place and therapies to put in place that she's able to live a very full life, right? And so not to damn people to this, oh, you're disabled, so you're not able to do anything, therefore you're not worthy, therefore you have no value. No. We have to move beyond that mentality and include all of God's people. Y'all went on a tangent. Let me keep going. So what does this text teach us? Even in religious moments, there are barriers present. Number 2, we are called to remove those barriers. Number 3, we are called to actively be involved with others and be one of the 4. And number 4, we are called to live by faith with all abilities. So how do we remove some of these barriers? Number 1, we take away the shame and the guilt. We teach sessions like this. This is actually absolutely wonderful that LaKesha has this vision to have these sessions to talk about so many different things. But it takes more. We have to talk in our churches about why we are hiding our sicknesses, so people understand that it's this mindset, that's the slave mentality that has been passed on to us, and we must decolonize that thought and not be ashamed of who we are, that we are created in the Imago Dei, that we were born this way for a reason, not we're broken, but we were born this way for a reason. However you are born, whatever way you are presented into this world, you were designed with purpose, not to be ashamed of, not to feel like you are broken. We also must choose to be one of the 4 and see the person, not the disability. And I should say not just the disability, because what we don't want to do is say, well, it's like saying, I don't see color. If you don't see my color, I got a big issue with you. And so for me, it's not saying, don't see their disability. I want you to see the person first. And if they choose that their identity has their disability, and I have a friend who calls himself the autism pastor. And then I know another person who has autism who's a pastor, and people don't know he has autism. Not because, unless you get to know him, not because he's ashamed, but because he wants you to see him as a person identity first. So it's getting to know the person and allowing them to self-identify, whether or not they identify disability first or person first. And then there's things called universal design. I'll briefly touch on that, and responsive design as well. That's my specialty. That's what I write about, is responsive design. Our inclusion is more than a buzzword. Y'all, it's 11:32. Let me speed up. It is more than a buzzword. It is a calling. It is bringing people together. It is not just saying our doors swing on welcome hinges. It is not putting a ramp at your church or in your faith community and thinking that's all you need. No, inclusion is more than just saying all are welcome. And there's stages to this. And you can't see where this came from, but these are the 5 stages, the Journey of Disability Attitudes by the Elam Christian Services. And so we use this with All Belong. And so I do have permission to use this. Most people start and don't understand that there are 5 stages. So most people start at the stage of ignorance when it comes to working with people with disabilities or even thinking about disability. Most people begin or start or at stage 1 and see people weakness and disability are a sign that God either does not care or is not able to fix the situation. In fact, they may be a result of sin or lack of faith. This is that ignorance level, right? Like the Pharisees said, well, this is blasphemy that he thinks he can forgive sin. But the whole situation wasn't about sin. The situation of the man on the mat was about the 4 people making their way and removing barriers. But they only focused on one, right? And if we read our Bibles and we really think about it, you cannot equate sin and disability. No, I mean, the Bible teaches us that they are not the same, right? Who sinned that this child may be born like this? Nobody did. This child was born this way for my Father, for God to be glorified, right? So that's the ignorance level. That's where we see a lot of people. The second stage is pity. And this is where people think they're more awake than they really are. They'll say things like, I feel sorry for people with disability. It's so bad that they have to live like that. And I'm blessed by God that I can help others. They have this sense of pity for others. Stage 3 is a sense of care. Like me, people with disabilities were created in God's image. So you care about people, and by that virtue alone, they have value because they were born in the Imago Dei. So you care about the people. However, at that moment, you're not seeing them as equal. So that's when you see people create ministries of a special needs ministry or a ministry of inclusion over here, or a caring ministry, where they see that they're not only pitying them, but they care and they want to help the people who are disabled. You see the difference? Pity, I feel sorry for them. I'm blessed, feel sorry for them. Stage 3 is care. I want to do something for them. Keyword them over there. Stage 4 is friendship. A person would be able to say, I've come to know and spend time with a friend who has a disability or family member. This person has value in God's sight, but also in mine. And I know that my life is better for having known this person. And as much as I've helped her or him, she has helped me. So it's this exchange, this friendship. With a person with disabilities. This person would say, okay, we need to include people with disabilities, not start a ministry over there, but let's talk about how do we include people so that we can build a friendship together. Where we want people to be, and y'all, I'm stretching people, is to get to stage 5 and see everyone as co-laborers. If God has called each of us to serve and praise God with every fiber of our being, then God has done the same for our brothers and our sisters of different abilities. How do we walk alongside? Not create a ministry over there like the care people, or let's figure out what little things we can do and build relationships. But we see people of varied abilities as co-laborers working together, not just on a disability ministry. And please don't have a disability ministry, because we need to have a whole conversation about that. But being able to say, how do we come together and how do we work together? That means there's somebody on your leadership team, and it's not about checking a box. It's about seeing people who are co-laborers, moving beyond the basic of welcoming people, but now we are co-laborers. Are there people on your worship team that want to be on your worship team that are differently abled? Are there people in your usher ministry or whatever ministry you have? Think about, are people able to serve? Not, let's put a disabled person on this one. We got a minority over there. No. How do we allow space and opportunity for people to use their gifts and be co-laborers? And how can we do that with all abilities? Now, if that person is nonverbal, I've worked with a church that really was in the co-laborer mindset, was struggling to figure out how, let's say Johnny could use Johnny's gift. Johnny loved to dance. Johnny loved to wave his little flag or a tambourine or whatever he could have in his hand. And they wanted to know, how can we enhance that worship experience for Johnny as well as others? And my simple answer was, if you have a praise team and Johnny loves to praise, let him praise with them. He didn't have to have a microphone, but what is it that what is it that he brings to the table? What is it that he enjoys doing? What is his gift? And his gift was stirring people up for worship. Then guess what? Allow him to be one of the praise team members and allow him to lead in worship. Not stick him in the back corner and hope nobody sees him and that he's a distraction. No, that's a gift for him to be able to stir up excuse me, the Holy Spirit in others. That is where we need to shift our mindset to moving beyond stage 1, 2, and 3, and really focusing on stages 4 and 5, where we are creating friendships and relationships. We're getting to know people, as well as figuring out how are we going to be co-laborers with people. That's how we get beyond basic inclusion. Now, a call for belonging is where I'm pushing people. And when I say belonging, it means that you have a relationship with me and I have a relationship with you. And whatever you need, I'm going to create space for that. And whatever you need to participate, I'm going to work my butt off till I figure out how to make it happen. And we're going to think about it together and work together. That's how we create spaces of belonging. It's not about putting people in a separate ministry. It's not about allowing people to just come and sit. It is, how do we incorporate your gifts? How do we incorporate what you bring as a part of this community? And what do you want from this community? So it's not about us just doing for other people. How do you build that relationship and that connection so that people are belonging to a space, that you miss that person when they're not in church? You miss that person if they don't show up for small group. You miss that person and that person misses you, that you're checking on that person throughout the week because you have a relationship and there is this sense of community. A call for belonging is creating a sense of community. And that is where we need to be, making sure we've ripped those barriers apart and creating space for community and relationships. That brings me to David and Mephibosheth, and it's 11:40, so I do want to leave time for questions. When I started my work, I originally was going to use David and Mephibosheth and ended up not using their story because I really felt like we needed to deal with other issues of creating spaces and removing barriers. But in David's story with Mephibosheth, I like to point out one key thing, and I did not put that scripture up, but I wanted to bring up one particular thing. And that's in 2 Samuel. David has dealt with all these things and he's back in the palace and he's sitting there and he has a conversation with one of his servants and he goes, "Hey, is there anybody from the house of Saul? You know, Jonathan's people. Jonathan was good to me. I want to be good to Jonathan. Anybody left from Jonathan's family? You know, Saul tried to kill me. It's okay. That's not the reason why. But is there anyone left out of Jonathan's family?" The servant says, "Yeah, there's one, but he's lame. He's crippled. He's down in Lodabar." Never says his name. He calls him the crippled one or the lame one, depending on your translation. David says, "Well, I want you to go get him from Lodabar. Bring him to me." So he sends this servant to go get him and bring him back. It is not until he's back where he belongs, back into community, that his name is mentioned. We know that he's lame. We're given his name. We're given his location. But we're not told his name. We know he's lame and we know where he's living. It is not until he's brought back into community that you ever hear the name Mephibosheth. Now, David was not a perfect man. Oh, no, not at all. But David brought Mephibosheth back where he belonged. Now, we could argue of, okay, you sent for him, you brought him back. How do we know he wanted to come back? We know he wanted to come back because once he got back to the palace, and after he dealt with his own fear and his own shame and his own issues of being broken, He was welcome at the king's table. He was provided for. And I bring that up because we can focus on being one of the four and removing those barriers and creating those spaces and creating universal design and responsive design. And all of that is wonderful. And I want you to hear me say, it is not until he's at the table that Mephibosheth's name is spoken. It is not until he's in relationship that we know his identity. So what does that mean for the people in your faith community? Do you know their names? Or do you just know that's the kid with autism? Do you know her name? Or do you just know that's the child who can't talk? How do we create that community of belonging? Well, we know their names, we know their needs, and we make room for them. And we don't just make room at the table and say, you're welcome to come by anytime. You can come sit at our table. No, we take one of the few good things we learned from David and we create community. We give them what they need. We make space and we say, what do you need? What do you need? Servants? Gotcha. All right, give them some servants. You know, if you need somebody to provide your meal, you're going to eat at this table. We're going to make sure it happens. David made it happen, right? That is where we are finding belonging. When we stop looking for ways to just fit people into small spaces and create space for community where we know their name and we know what we need. And I say that because I had to do that for my own children, not just my daughter, for my son. I had to do that because my son has ADHD and can be a little quirky. And I needed to create space for him. But it can't always be the parent of the child or a family member that's making the space. I'm calling on leaders like you, those who are determined to make ministries of impact and ministries of change. It doesn't have to be a Stacy who has a direct experience and a lived experience. It needs to be people who are willing to make space and community, to look around your community and say, these are the barriers that have to come down. These are the things we have to do, and not make excuses on why we can't do it, but be determined that you can do it. One way of doing that is through what we call responsive design. And if you want to hear more about that, please send me a message and we can talk more about that, or if LaKesha's going to have another way for us to learn and grow. Responsive design is, I see the need, I know the need, and now let me respond to the need. I am creating a plan of action for one particular person. Universal design creates it for everybody. Everybody's welcome. This is what we have for everybody. Responsive design is catering for the needs of an individual. And that's where we get key change and make a real shift from basic levels of inclusion. I'm going to stop right there and to see if you have any questions. There we go. I want to stop right there to see if we have any questions or comments and or anything you want me to go back over or say. I went just highlights over some stuff because I wanted to make sure I got everything in. Let me go back over the comments really quickly. Stacy, is there any suggestions or things that you would say? One of the other things about responsive design that I do want to say, because I see that Stacy is a special education administrator and attorney, responsive design, and this is what I love working with faith communities and doing, is meeting with that child's IEP team, creating teams in churches that work with children with IEPs, or IFSPs, individualized family service plans, from when they're young all the way up through college, when they have, continue to have their IEPs. We teach communities. Well, I teach communities how to create a support community within their church so that they are able to go to IEP meetings, have somebody there to help a parent understand their IEP, because so many parents are intimidated by the process that we create those wraparound teams. And then those wraparound teams are able to take that IEP, that individualized education plan from the special ed department of school, and create that responsive design from the IEP. So you're using the same language, you're using the same accommodations, you are wrapping those services around. So if the school uses a certain device for communication, then the church is going to provide that. If the school uses a certain board for communication or pictures or whatever is in that IEP that makes sense that we can do in the church, we teach those communities how to do that. And the more you do that, it becomes this wraparound holistic service for that family and for that individual. So I do want to make sure in responsive design, you understand you are responding to the particular needs of the person. All right. Oh, X 28 weeker. Ooh, 28 weeker is good too. 24 weeker. Wow. 1 pound, 8 ounces. Great. I was so glad. I hope you all are taking something away from this. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. If I missed anything, I wanted to make sure I honor the fact they wanted us to leave time for you to get a break and for you to be able to get to your next session. It has truly been an honor and a privilege to be a part of this. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me on my website. I actually have two. Our Mary's Grace website is down right now. We're doing some revamping because we're creating new teams that will be able to go into churches to create those more direct responsive teams. So you'll be able to see that, but it is www.marysgracenc.org, and that should be back up in the next 2 weeks as we are adding more services. So thank y'all for coming. Thank you for being a part of this. Continue to enjoy this wonderful conference, and hats off to LaKesha and her team for making this happen. You'll have a wonderful day, and I always end with, if no one has told you today, let me be the first to say, I absolutely love you. And so does the good Lord. Y'all have a wonderful day. Thank you, Hope.